Kenneth Newton.
Okay. Kenneth Newton. And when were you born? What is your date of birth?
Let's try July 15, 1930.
I see, 1930. So when did you enlist in the U.S. Marine?
On August 1st, 1948.
August 1st, 1948.
Right.
What brought you to enlist?
Well, that's a long story.
Yeah.
My father was a Marine in World War I. My brother was a Marine in World War II at Guadalcanal. He was with the Edson Raider Battalion. He was awarded the Purple Heart and the Navy Cross, and later expired. My sister joined the Marine Corps in 1943 and stayed for the duration of the war, getting out in August of 45. And when it was my turn in 47, I enlisted in the Marine Corps. Family tradition.
Wow. Oh my. So did you kind of know growing up that you will also join?
Yes. Yes.
Then what were you doing before you joined? Were you still going to high school? Or?
Yes, high school. Yes.
I see. And where were you guys living?
We were living in the suburb of Chicago. However, I went to high school in the city of Chicago.
I see. So, do you remember when you first heard about Korea and there's a war? Do you remember?
Yes, I do.
Did you know about
I
Korea?
had just returned from leave at home, of course, and returning to my base in North Carolina, Camp Lejeune. An announcement, this is on the train, an announcement was made by a conductor that an invasion of South Korea was occurring by the North Korean government. I want to believe it was June 23rd or 4th or 5th. And that all military personnel were to report back to their base immediately. And of course, I was en route to do that. And when I got back to the base June 25th, the war was on. We were immediately mustered up, summons together our different outfits and said, let's pack it up, guys. We're going to be on a troop train in 2 or 3 days, which we did. So we went from the East Coast, Camp Lejeune, to Camp Pendleton, picking up reserves along the way. We made some stops in Little Rock, Arkansas, Texarkana, Vegas, ultimately Camp Pendleton. Arriving there probably 1st of July, thereabouts.
So your basic or your training before Korea was at Camp Pendleton?
No, it was at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Okay. Then when did you finally arrive in Korea?
We hit the shores at Incheon on September 15th, 1950.
Wow. 1950, yeah. Oh, wow.
Actually, I'm sure you've been back.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, different groups, different outfits went in different points.
Yeah.
My outfit happened to go into this little island of Wamidu, which I think now has been connected with the landfill to the mainland. At that time, there was a causeway. So they wanted they knew that there was problems and enemy on this little island, Wamidu, and so somebody had to go in there and take out that before we proceeded into Incheon.
I see. Wow. Can you tell me more about that? I think that's kind of well known, the Walmido. So what was your unit?
I was at that moment. I was with the 11th Marines, which was an artillery unit, but all Marines are trained, number one, to be riflemen. So we were given that assignment of going in and mopping up whatever enemy resistance was left. At mid-afternoon, there's this enormous tide that goes in and out. So after the first group went into Incha early in the morning, we had to wait 12 hours. So we went in at like 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
I see.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was a pretty high point. It was an excellent observation point to look into the whole countryside and to visually scope out where the troops were in Incheon and what was happening. So that's important that you have the high ground, so that you have that. You don't have all the technology you got today. A lot of it was just a manual observation.
Right. Wow. So what was your first impression of Korea?
Bad. There wasn't a lot of time to prepare the troops for what was really going on. We knew that there was an offensive attack by the North Koreans. I would say that vast majority of us said, well, what is our problem with the North Korean government? What's the issue? Not knowing that they were a satellite country of both China and Russia. When you're an 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid, you really don't have all that history in front of you. But it didn't take too long for them to educate us as to, hey, we're part of a United Nations, what's going to be a counteroffensive to try to retake the ground that was already taken by the North Koreans, and go in there and do battle and finish this thing up quickly so we don't sustain casualties or, God forbid, dead people. And that was it. So, and as we went in with such a massive force, a lot of great preparation for that, and we actually choked off the North Koreans that were penetrated so far into South Korea that we went in without a lot of resistance. There was still resistance, but not what we expected. And we went, our particular group got within about 6 miles of Panmunjom. Later on, we found out to be the 38th parallel. And we settled in there for about 2 or 3 weeks without much action at all, at least on our front. Whatever action occurred was usually at night. They were real good people to attack at night. And that wasn't customarily the way battles are fought. Anytime you're fighting a battle at night, you really don't know who the enemy is. You don't know. You really can't distinguish, who you're firing at. Yeah. At any rate, we got the orders. I want to think it was already October that we were going to go get aboard ship. And once we were aboard ship, we traveled through the South China Sea around the bottom of the peninsula. And then it was announced that we're going to be going into North Korea and landing in Wonsan and the whole division. There was advanced troops, of course, that were in earlier, but the bulk of the division landed in Wonsan. And I'm sure you heard it many times. We were told by the upper echelon of officers that we're going to go in, we're going to mop up the rest of the resistance, and you'll be home with your families at Christmas time.
Yeah.
But it didn't work out that way.
Yeah.
So, at that point, I was reassigned from an artillery group to the 7th Marine Regiment, which was a infantry group, for the ride up to the Yola River, if I'm saying it correctly, the Yola River, dividing Manchuria from that.
Yeah.
And I was assigned to a Captain Pierce, who was an intelligence officer, along with a guy who was a radio man and a jeep driver and a guy riding shotgun, or he was our protecting in case there was any resistance and stuff. And we progressed up this mountain road, city after city, Sudan, Ordong. Anyhow, after a couple of days, we ended up in Hagaru, which was a dividing point because we all, at this point, we can see that there's a massive force coming together, including the United States Army. We had not seen these guys. And then it was announced to us that we're going to push further. The Marines are going to go up on the west side of the reservoir. The Army's going to go up on the east side. And we chugged off. And in a matter of 2 days, we went through a valley, probably around the 1st of November. Weather wasn't bad. And at this valley was this immense body of water called the Changjin Reservoir. And we had our orders to keep going. So it was, we went ahead and we were making probably only about 15 miles a day. And we got up over the mountain ridge, and it was Thanksgiving Day. And from that mountain ridge, we were close enough to actually see Manchuria. And the officer certainly had more information than we did. He says, guys, take a look at China, Manchuria, which we did. He says, okay, we're going to spend the night here and then go back to Udamni. And they served us our Thanksgiving meal up there, which was a great turkey and cranberries and sweet potatoes. We had that meal, and he was in communications. All of a sudden, he says, change your plans. We're returning to Udamni, which we did. And we set up tents, figuring that this is where we're going to be, this is going to be our outpost. And everything was very quiet. Till around 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. We were hearing a lot of action outside, a lot of explosions. Captain Pierce says, Newton, go out there and see what's going on. I walk out of the tent, never ever thinking that we were under attack. And this is, wow, it's like the 4th of July. I said, the sky is lit up. It's man, there's ammunition, there's stuff flying all over the place. I walked back in the tent. I said, Captain, I said, I don't report. I said, but somebody is they're having a party or something. This is wild. Man, he's on the phone or the radio. And they got the information that the forward outfits were under attack by the Chinese. And at that point, it was pretty much chaos. Everybody was assigned their weapon, and everybody was reassigned to go to the front lines, which meant climbing the mountains, and as you've heard so many times, bad weather had set in, really bad weather, cold, snow. And you chugged up these mountains and spend the night under attack by the Chinese. And fortunately, at least my area, we had outnumbered them. By that I mean, if we had 25 or 30 guys, they may have had 15. We suffered some bad casualties. And then we got the orders that we're going to move off the mountain and go right back to Udamni, get reorganized, get reassigned, and begin our attack in a different direction. And all of that went very well, organized. There was many smaller outfits organized to get into the hills and mountains. I didn't have that assignment. My assignment was to stay on the road. And we made the walk to Hagaru. Probably, my memory would say that it took about 7 days. And we occasionally came under fire. Again, we had some casualties. And when we got to Hagaru, none of us had eaten. So it was a second Thanksgiving treat, which amounted to oatmeal, peaches, and coffee all dumped into our helmets. But if you haven't eaten in 7 or 8 days, you're hungry. And we had that feast. Then we were assigned tents to get some sleep. And in the morning, I was called out and examined by a medical doctor. And I had a wound in the shoulder. And they examined it, and they says, we're going to evacuate you. And I says, how? And most guys were still in Jeeps or any kind of military. He said, well, we were able to fly guys out. And I got tagged to be evacuated. And
Which shoulder?
the left shoulder. A lot of guys were hurt worse. As you can see, I didn't lose anything. And evacuated to, I think we went to the hospital in Yokohama. I know it was big Navy hospital. And stayed there for about, if you could recover sufficiently, get your health back, you were going to be shipped back and rejoin your outfit. Didn't happen to me. Their call was to, I don't know, I was there, it seemed like at least a month. And ended up back in the States. So from start to finish, I probably spent 4 or 5 months in South Korea.
I see. Wow. How did you get wounded? What? Just one of the?
Yeah, it was a ricochet. We came under fire. You know, it's a funny. Each person can tell have a different version of the same story. As we were beginning the return to Hagaru, when we were coming out of the mountains, somehow the outfits, they got separated. Some outfits had to move more material. They were slow. I didn't. I had a rifle and myself and a pack and a buddy or two. And this road wasn't as wide as this room, and they were bringing down some heavy equipment. So you would tend to, in this case here, you'd walk around a pile of rocks, the side of a mountain, and the Chinese would recognize you, and you came under fire. I recall an explosion to my left where there was gunfire that hit the side of the rock. And that gunfire ricocheted and came over here. Jimmy, we were so cold that you really didn't know you were hit. There were a lot of guys that were, in some cases it was good because the blood coagulated before they bleed to death. And some it didn't help at all. And you could feel the sting of it, but it wasn't so severe. It was like somebody threw a rock at you. Okay. And all of a sudden, the guy that was alongside of me, Ray Thomas, he says, you're leaking over here out of your parka. And because, again, there was no severe pain or anything. Okay. So thank God the parka was there. We had about 7 layers of clothes on us, besides shirts and flannel shirts and sweaters and whatever else you could get. This parka was thick. And at any rate, that was it. And we, when we went to the medical base at this airfield in Hagaru, they were evacuating probably, I'm going to guess, somewhere between 25 and 40 guys. I mean, you just went in on stretchers because it's a short hop from there into into Japan. And for me, that was the end of my service in Korea.
I see. Do you remember seeing like local Koreans or
Oh, yes.
Korean
many.
armies or anything?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, on our way up into in Hagaru, it's a memory that never goes away. We're eating this lousy sea rations, pork and beans, and all of a sudden, and Hagaru, well, I can't say it's a big town, but it was probably a good farming community, because when we went in, there was actually a building that was built out of stone and stuff, and there was chickens. Now we didn't see, all that stuff was non-existent in South Korea, because they took everything they could. And my buddy from Long Island, New York, was a bit of a farmer, and he said, "Ken, let's get some of these chickens. We're gonna have chicken dinner." And again, we're sleeping outside in either squatteds or on the ground. And these North Korean people, because we barged in, we're the enemy. We barged into their place and we took it over, and I remember so well. It was okay, it was big, and everything was stone inside with like bamboo mats.
Wow.
But they had these huge rocks. Jimmy, they were 2 or 3 feet. And they heated those things up all day on a fire, and that was their heat. But it was comfortable. I mean, if it's 20 below outside and you go into a place where it's 45 degrees above, that's significant. And we stayed there. And of course, we couldn't communicate. But they weren't offensive to us, probably because they were scared. I mean, we were now coming in great numbers. And we spent 2 days there. We kind of wiped out their chickens. But that whole area was secure. And that was a massive point where the troops were. I mean, they brought everything into there, because it was a level spot amongst the mountains. And of course, a level enough to build an airstrip. A lot of credit goes to the engineers for doing that. And it was populated. We couldn't, as enlisted men, we didn't understand. It was obviously a agricultural area. We never paid much attention if they had any kind of power. But the history books tell us that the Chosun Reservoir was a hydropower station. We knew on the way up there was some power stations. We weren't aware of whether or not they had any kind of electricity. There wasn't any television or certainly internet, but it was an interesting point. And when we left Hagaru going north, boy, it became very primitive. I mean, and you damn me, I don't remember seeing any North Korean remnants. They had all withdrawn, and they were replaced by the new Chinese forces. So that was it.
Do you remember the faces of the Chinese soldiers?
Yes. Yes. We all attested the same thing. Of course, they're dressed in white, and we're in our dark olive dress. While they're dressed in white, they blended in with the snow. They had a very savage, a very rough, like a sunburn. They were darker, dark complected. They're still called, part of their civilian voluntary force that was going to stop the aggression of the United Nations. I don't know that part of the politics of it, but we saw a lot of them dead, where they hunkered down into what amounted to be potholes in the road, ditches, and they were either frozen or shot. A lot of them. I only ran into one group of prisoners that were being interrogated for whatever information they had. If somebody hasn't mentioned, one of our brave, super brave officers was Chinese, born and raised in San Francisco.
Wow.
When we knew him as First Lieutenant Choan Lai, or Lee, L-I-E. And he stayed in the Marine Corps. He stayed in the Marine Corps and went to the rank of colonel. And what was unique about Lieutenant Lee is he wore a red scarf on his neck, like a large scarf. And of course, that's like, and he was a gung-ho Marine officer, charge. He helped us immeasurably because they're speaking Chinese, and we had some South Korean guys with us that were interpreters. But he could speak fluent Chinese, obviously. So when they were giving orders, he understood that, and he would give direct orders back. It confused him, at least from our standpoint. It confused the enemy. And you know, he was our hero. The red scarf. We'd always say, man, you're leaving yourself wide open. He says, bring him on. Yeah, that was pretty unique. He's passed away because he'd be in his 90s. He was at every one of these. I think he ended up, he was in D.C. and he was working for the government after he spent his 30 years in the Marine Corps, worked for the government, some sort of espionage service.
I see.
Wonderful guy, wonderful guy.
Choan Lee.
Yeah. He's in the books. There's a book, Colder Than Hell. Yeah. He's the guy who wrote the book, who I knew. He and Lee were good buddies. You know, they were together, both officers. Good guys.
Yeah.
We were blessed. We had great leaders, great leaders. You know, most of them were World War II guys. Real smart. They wouldn't let you think about anything bad. Keep you positive, keep you moving forward. That's important. Yeah.
You've of course, seen how Korea is now.
Oh, I've been back twice.
Ooh, I see.
Yeah. First trip was in the 49th anniversary. So put it together, 1999. Didn't know what to expect. Just overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. Super. You know, it was one of the ends. And then we went back about 5 years later. After I saw the first thing, I said, I got to go back. You know, treated, red carpet all over. From the moment we stepped off the plane, the red carpet. And I hooked up with a guy who, at the time, he's probably out now. He served as our security guy, South Korean officer, served as our security guy. And I don't know if his parents came to the States, but anyhow, he graduated from San Francisco University. Okay. And then went back to Korea. And he was wearing civvies, but he was in the service. Kind of a secret service guy. And he served as, on our buses for watchdogs. Yeah. And I always sat at the back of the bus with him, so we could talk. Yeah.
I see.
But yes, I've been back. Yeah.
I see.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
They're doing better than we are. I'm so impressed by the culture. The culture. It's just unbelievable. It's part of our first tour, and they take us to Korean school, grade school, and all these little kids come. They know all about us. That's taught. And we've given that stuff away in the United States. Our history. We've given it away. At least that's my perspective of it.
Right.
Yeah, it was just wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, some do say I've heard often that Korean War is like the forgotten war.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I don't have a strong opinion about that. I understand. You know, again, we just come out of World War II, massive, you know, a horrendous war. The casualties were just huge. And because all of our political leaders were saying, no more wars, they'll say that forever. It was hard to accept that with less than 5 years that we were going to be back in a war. And like they would do after any great war, they began to disarm this country. And if you say, well, World War II was the Great War, I don't think anybody, including our government, thought that when we were going into South Korea, that that was going to last more than 2 or 3 months, let alone 3 years. And again, we were recovering from World War II, and a lot of the older people, including the military, they'd had enough of war. So it was easy. It didn't get the coverage it should have until we got trapped up there in North Korea. Then it was a big news story. And after that, it kind of just, you know, the Chinese they pushed across the 38th. We pushed them back. It became back and forth, shooting war. And I guess nobody wanted to give ground. And we don't even have an armistice. All we got is a ceasefire.
Right.
So,
Right.
to answer your question, the forgotten, I think if you had asked a lot of on-the-street people about the Korean War, they would have no clue.
Yeah.
You either have to be Korean or you have to be from the Far East, or you got to be a historian.
Just a few more questions now. What does the Korean War mean to you, for you in your life?
Well, it should be pretty apparent that we made some great relationships. The people that put labels on things call us a band of brothers, and we truly are. I just never in my wildest dreams could think that the guys that I was with in Korea, that for as long as they were alive, we stayed in touch. And I'm talking 20 or 25 guys. There's a brotherhood, there's a link. It's almost better than family. And they're from New York to California. In fact, I'm here with 4 guys that we are still survivors. While we came back to the States, got out of the service, did our careers, raised our families, we didn't stay as close together. Maybe a Christmas card. But after that, we reconnected. I'm one of the guys that was a subscriber to a Veterans of Foreign Wars magazine, and they had a little article in there that there's a group called The Chosen Few. Contact this number. And it was 2 guys in Baltimore, which I called. And that's how I got hooked up. And then I began to alert other guys, hey, there's an organization out there of us guys. And to try to answer your question, I don't have a strong opinion other than my buddies are still, hopefully, if they can't make it, I hope they're okay. And the ones that are here, I know are okay. It's over with. Okay. Move on to the next chapter.
Who are the close buddies that are here with you today?
A guy by the name of Bob Stevens. He's from Florida. Deborah was interviewing Pete Nato. He's from Minnesota. Ben Jims is from the Chicagoland area, Lincolnwood. And we have Bob Henderson, Colonel Bob Henderson, ended up being a educator at University of Illinois. I think he's a PhD. but in very, very bad health. He was WW2, very, very hard of hearing, walker. Those are the guys that were in my outfit that I'm still connected with.
Wow. What would you like to say? Any other last remarks for the younger generations that would be watching this later on? As a Korean War veteran, as a U.S. Marine veteran, or just you. Anything that.
If you don't have it, find the love for your country. We could learn a big lesson from the South Korean people. Can't be a more grateful nation of all the places that we've been in as a country. There's none greater than South Korea. Those people haven't forgotten the forgotten war. The last comment, the last comment is, again, love your country, participate, and be a good citizen. Amen, Jimmy.